Hello fans and friends, welcome to a brand new series conceived by yours truly. This is a little something I like to call Clash of the Icons. We're going to take two franchises in gaming and pit them against one another from their first entries to their second and so on. Whoever scores the most points will be declared the winner and the superior franchise. Today's matchup is Final Fantasy versus The Legend of Zelda, two of the greatest RPG series of all time. For this list, we're only counting the main entries of Final Fantasy, and for Zelda, we're excluding the multiplayer titles like Four Swords Adventure, Triforce Heroes, and of course, the CDI games.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
But with that out of the way, let's the Icons clash! The first round features the OG Final Fantasy versus the OG Zelda. Both timeless classics, however, Zelda just holds up much better. It's easier to get into, and was totally original. Final Fantasy, on the other hand, was built off third-party D&D software, and is a bit difficult to navigate. Therefore, this round goes to Zelda. Next up, we have Final Fantasy II versus Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Both are considered to be the worst of their respective franchises. However, Zelda 2 was still a big hit in North America, whereas Final Fantasy II didn't even get a North American release until much later. And just for that, the second round also goes to Zelda. Next is Final Fantasy III versus A Link to the Past. Final Fantasy III is another game in the series that didn't get a Western release until much later, whereas A Link to the Past was a huge hit over here in the States, a game synonymous with the Super Nintendo and considered one of the best in the series, while Final Fantasy III, still good, is sadly rough around the edges. Another point awarded to Zelda. Our fourth round features Final Fantasy IV versus Link's Awakening. Final Fantasy IV, known originally in the States as Final Fantasy II, was the first of the 16-bit era, and the first truly great entry into the series. Link's Awakening for the Game Boy, while also a great game, loses points for being on inferior hardware, as well as the story not really having any connections to Hyrule or the Triforce or anything significant, as it's all just a dream. And for those reasons, Final Fantasy scores its first point. Round 5 features Final Fantasy V versus Ocarina of Time. Final Fantasy V was the last game to not initially get a Western release until much later. The story wasn't the best, but the improved job system is where the game truly shines. Sadly, it's up against Ocarina of Time, the greatest game of all time. It's really no contest here. Another point for Zelda. Our sixth round features Final Fantasy VI versus Majora's Mask. Fans will argue that these are the best entries in the series. Final Fantasy VI has arguably the best and darkest story, the best villain, as well as the biggest cast of characters, and even dared to venture into a more steampunk sci-fi setting. However, Majora's Mask, also an excellent game, suffers the same problem Link's Awakening does, with a very filler plot, which means this round goes to Final Fantasy. The seventh round features Final Fantasy VII versus Oracle of Age/Seasons. Final Fantasy VII really needs no introduction due to how iconic it is. However, Oracle is often a forgotten entry into the Zelda mythos. It did something really cool with the two games, being its own separate adventures and requiring you to complete both to know the whole story, each featuring unique items exclusive to one title or the other. And while it got great reviews, so did Final Fantasy VII, the game that's synonymous with the original PlayStation. This round goes to Final Fantasy. Round 8 features Final Fantasy VIII versus The Wind Waker, two of the most polarizing titles in each other's series. While a lot of fans were turned off by both Final Fantasy VIII's new draw and junction battle mechanics and The Wind Waker's unique art design, the latter of which had superior hardware and was just a better game in general. Point goes to Zelda. Our ninth round features Final Fantasy IX versus the Minish Cap. Final Fantasy IX is one of the best in the series and served as an apology to the fans who didn't like 8, even going back to its original fantasy roots, while the Minish Cap is unfortunately one of the weaker games in the Zelda franchise. It's almost no contest. Final Fantasy gets the win here. Round 10 features Final Fantasy X versus Twilight Princess. Final Fantasy X was the first of the PS2 era and the first game in the series to feature voice acting. Although its story feels a bit too Star Wars-ish for some, it still feels very fresh, and while Twilight Princess is a great game in its own right, it feels more like a poor man's version of Ocarina of Time, and just for that reason, Final Fantasy gets another point. Our 11th round matchup is Final Fantasy XI Online versus Phantom Hourglass. While Square saw the success of EverQuest, they knew they had to get a piece of the MMO pie. Sadly, the game has not aged well, where Phantom Hourglass still holds up. Point goes to Zelda. Round 12 features Final Fantasy XII versus Spirit Tracks. Both are the last in their respective hardware's trilogies, with next-gen platformers just around the corner. Final Fantasy XII is a pretty solid game, while Spirit Tracks is one of the weaker and forgettable Zelda titles. This round goes to Final Fantasy. Round 13 features Final Fantasy XIII versus Skyward Sword. Another no contest here, as Final Fantasy XIII is one of the worst in the series, where Skyward Sword is an excellent title taking full advantage of the Wii Motion Plus controls. Another victory for Zelda. Round 14 pits Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn versus A Link Between Worlds. Final Fantasy XIV, despite having a very rough start, managed to redeem itself with its A Realm Reborn relaunch. It succeeded in pretty much every way that Final Fantasy XI failed. A Link Between Worlds is amazing as well, but loses points for feeling like a cartoony HD remake of A Link to the Past. Point goes to Final Fantasy here. Our 15th matchup is Final Fantasy XV versus Breath of the Wild. A lot of people were disappointed with Final Fantasy XV and its whole J-pop hot topic boy band aesthetic, while Breath of the Wild, upon its release, was hailed by some as the greatest in the series. No contest. Zelda spanks Final Fantasy in this one. And our final match is Final Fantasy XVI versus Tears of the Kingdom. Come on, really? I mean, 16 was pretty damn good, but Tears of the Kingdom has virtually raised the bar for years to come. So, yeah, another point for Zelda. There you have it, folks, and now we tally up the scores with Final Fantasy scoring 7 points and Zelda scoring 9 points. Ladies and gentlemen, Zelda has beaten Final Fantasy. But hey, there's no shame in losing to arguably the greatest game series of all time. Be sure to join us in the future, where we'll feature Castlevania vs. Mega Man. We'll see you next time.